Hi, good morning. This is Charlie speaking. Let's go ahead and get started. And we'll put ourselves up here. Um, so there are a few people here. I appreciate that. If somebody can just go ahead and say hello in the comments, just so I know you can hear me. Looks like I'm broadcasting just fine, but I always want to be sure. Um, I don't know if this is going to take 2 or 3 hours, but basically, I like to go over in detail how the air conditioning system works and what sort of problems that we normally find with air conditioning systems, how to check for the wiring, and so forth. And Mark, thanks for doing that. I really appreciate it. All right. So let's go ahead and let's see what happens with this. Hi, Rosa. Thank you as well. All right. So I know nobody likes to do any sort of writing. I hope you guys have a little bit of a notepad or something with you. We are going to have to um, write down a few notes. All right. So a lot of the what happens with air conditioning, I guess, the main goal is we want to absorb the heat from inside the house, and then we want to move that heat to the outside of the house, and the result of that is going to end up being, oops, sorry. The result of that is going to end up being we feel cool inside the house. All right. So how do we do that? We have to do a little bit of sciences. Believe it or not, the guy that invented air conditioning, I believe his last name is Carrier. So, obviously they named the air conditioning company after him. I believe his first name is Marcus. Marcus Carrier. Either that or it was a safety for the Bears. One of the two. But either way, we'll keep working. So heat does move. Heat is always moving from whatever the warmest object is to the coolest object. The bigger the separation between the temperatures, the faster the heat's going to move. All right. So if I am in a room of 75 degrees and I have a glass of ice water with me, the ice water is going to be 32 degrees. But that heat, that's 75 degrees in the room, is going to continuously be absorbed into the liquid until that liquid is completely a liquid. Then that's also going to start raising in temperature until both temperatures are going to be the same. So either the liquid's going to end up being 75 degrees or so forth. Now the second one is kind of an important. We talk about BTUs, and I do want you to be able to write that down real quick. I'll come back to this screen. Oh, Willis Carrier. Thank you, Mark. Sorry. So Marcus Carrier was the Bears player. So Willis Carrier is the inventor of air conditioning. Oops, that's okay. So let's. Oops, I did not want to do that. Okay. Sorry, guys. I'm having. There we go. All right. So let's start writing a few notes on here. All right. We do need to know the definition of BTU. That stands for British Thermal Unit. I guess I would have been better off going up and down on this one. But British. And the British Thermal Unit is the amount of energy, whether it be coal, gas, water, whatever it is, that's required to raise 1 pound of water 1 degree Fahrenheit. And I know I'm going to spell Fahrenheit wrong. Well, maybe not. 1 degree Fahrenheit. So I usually go through a little bit of a thing here where, let's see, I'm going to get me back on the screen here. There we go. All right. So I usually go through a little bit of a thing where how much energy are we needing when we start raising temperatures of water? And a lot of these questions I keep asking are, if I had 1 pound of water sitting in front of me and I want to put that on a stove and put a fire on it, how much gas am I going to need to raise that temperature 50 degrees? All right. FAH. Mark, I'm going to stop liking you so real soon. But anyway, I hope you're giggling at that. So 1 pound of water, 1 degree Fahrenheit. If I have 50 degrees, or I have 1 pound of water that's 50 degrees, and I want to raise it and make it 100 degrees, I hope we're realizing I have to add 50 BTUs to that. And that's how long the fire has to burn and how much gas needs to be done. If I want to go from 100 degrees to 200 degrees and I still have that same 1 pound of water, then we're going to be using 100 degrees. Where it comes into play is on this second dot on here, where it says an object does not change temperature while it is changing state. However, it does continue to absorb or expel, it depends which way it's going, to absorb or expel BTUs. So as I have that 1 pound of water and it's sitting on the stove and it starts to boil, and when it's boiling, it's actually changing state. It's moving from a liquid to a gas state. As it's boiling, we know that water boils at atmospheric pressure. Water boils at 212 degrees. So while that water is boiling and as it continues to boil off, it's going to stay at 212 degrees until it's completely turned to steam. Now, of course, when it's turned to steam, it goes into the atmosphere, so we cannot control it any longer. But I want you to realize that as that's changing state, it's going to remain the same temperature. Same thing happens at liquids and solids. So if I take a glass of ice water and I'm in a 75-degree room, then that 75 degrees is going to be absorbed into the ice water. The ice water will be 32 degrees. That's the freezing point of water. So as it keeps absorbing BTUs, then it's going to be melting all of that ice until the water is completely water and all the ice is gone. Once all the ice is gone, then the water will start increasing in temperature until it equalizes in the room. All right. But there's still an enormous amount of BTUs that come across. So when we tell people, 1 BTU is 1 pound of water, 1 degree Fahrenheit, but when we go from 210 to 214, that's not 4 BTUs. That's more like about 1,000 BTUs. All right. We can also raise the temperature. We can raise and lower the boiling temperatures of water. So I can keep water as a liquid if I increase the pressure to it. I could actually make water boil at extremely low temperatures. One of my favorite movies is Hunt for Red October. And there was a line in there when the Russian sub did their Crazy Ivan, and then the American sub put it in full reverse. And Jonesy, he was the sonar guy, or the guy that does all the listening to everything, he started yelling to captain and say, "Hey, we're cavitating." So cavitating basically is when you're boiling water under extremely low pressures, and then you move that water over to high pressure and it collapses instantly, which is cavitation. So what they're doing is they got this submarine moving forward and they throw it in reverse, and that thing is huge, and those propellers are extremely powerful. So they're creating such a negative pressure on the front side, or I should say the back side of those impellers, and that the water actually starts to boil under those low pressures at that temperature. Once it passes over and gets to the high pressure side of the propeller, then those bubbles instantly collapse and it's just no good anymore. Or then it becomes a liquid. All right, so when we increase the pressure, we increase the boiling temperature. When we decrease the pressure, we end up decreasing the boiling temperatures as well, or changing from liquid to gas. Same thing when we pressurize an object, and that's not on our list. So whenever we pressurize an object, we're going to raise that boiling temperature. When we depressurize an object, we're going to decrease that boiling temperature. All of these items work with our air conditioning system. In a nutshell, they end up that's how the refrigerant works. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to bring a cold liquid inside the house. Remember, we have to absorb the heat. So if we bring a cold liquid inside the house and we blow warm air over it, we're going to absorb that heat. Heat travels from hot to cold. So if it's warmer inside the house than what it is in the liquid, then heat's going to move through the radiator coils into the refrigerant and convert that refrigerant from a liquid to a gas. And as it converts from a liquid to a gas, it has to absorb a tremendous amount of BTUs. And I need you to remember that part. It absorbs a tremendous amount of BTUs. And even on the other end, when we're discharging the heat, we're switching from a gas to a liquid. When we switch from a gas to a liquid, we're discharging a tremendous amount of BTUs. So in short, this is our typical air conditioning system. All right. I like you to realize there's about 4 different components. Not about, there are basically 4 different components that comes in here. So as we look at and let's start over here at the compressor. We'll start at the compressor. You can see that on the lower half side. So inside we have our furnace, our air handler. You can see our air conditioning coil on top. I know I put the blue flames on there. I'm sorry. I just thought they were cute, so I put them in there. But for the most part, the furnace isn't going to be running when the air conditioning is running. It kind of defeats the purpose. So we'll start at the compressor. In that compressor is going to have a gas. That compressor is going to compress the gas. Once we compress the gas, we're going to raise the temperature. Usually it goes up to somewhere around 150 degrees. If it's like, let's say it's really hot out and it's 100 degrees outside, the refrigerant's going to be 150 degrees. The outside air is going to be 100 degrees. So the heat is going to be transferring from the refrigerant to the outside air. So as we go through those coils that are up there, as we go through these coils that are up here, that is going to discharge the heat under high pressure. So that boiling point is up at the top, and it's going to convert to a liquid. It's still going to remain a high pressure, but it's going to end up being a liquid. So that liquid now is going to come back towards the house, and we're going to have something that's going to hold that pressure back, some sort of restricting valve that's going to be on there. When we restrict that liquid and only let a little bit in there, we significantly lower the pressure of that liquid. By lowering the pressure of that liquid, we're also lowering the temperature. So after we compress it, we're somewhere around 150 degrees. After we discharge heat, we're somewhere around 90 to 100 degrees. It's going to be warm to the touch, the liquid line. The liquid line goes through the restrictor. It's going to drop down to somewhere around 20 degrees. Probably not that close, more like 50 degrees. And then as we're 50 degrees or 20 to 50 in that ballpark, now we take that liquid, we blow it or blow warm air from the house over that. That's going to cause that liquid to boil because now our boiling temperature has been lowered because we lowered the pressure. It's going to convert to a gas. That gas is going to go back to the compressor and get compressed up again. And in short, that's how it works. But I think it's still a good idea to break down the air conditioning system and just get a clearer understanding. All right. So how do we get the heat basically from the room air or the outside air? how do we get it to the refrigerant? All right, so let me pop up a few slides here, and we can talk about these things, and hopefully I won't go back up there. All right, so if we ever look at the outside coil, you can actually see these fins because they're just out in the open. They're very tight together. They're thin pieces of metal, and they're attached to the coils. And those coils run back and forth throughout everything, and the fins actually blow the air over. So big, wide, narrow pieces of metal where I'm going to flow air in between them, so they're able to absorb a tremendous amount of heat as the air passes through them, or discharge the heat as well. So it makes it pretty efficient. So that's how I'm absorbing the heat and getting it into the refrigerant. And the more times that coil passes over the more air, the more heat it can either absorb or discharge. So at this point in time, we're talking about warm air going over the coil. It ends up absorbing the heat into the coil, and then cool air is what we're going to feel coming through the house. The problem with these coils is because they're so close together, I should say these fins, they're so close together that if there's always going to be condensation forming on them. If we let dust get past the filter and get onto these coils, it starts creating a layer of mud. And once that layer of mud is created, especially with forced air furnaces that we have in the Chicagoland area, once that mud gets on there, we really don't have access to the top side of these fins to clean them. Or the bottom side of the fins, I misspoke, to go ahead and clean these things. So now we're going to have to hire somebody to basically remove the coil, get to the underside, and clean all these things just to let the air pass through. Because if the air cannot pass through, then there's no way to basically absorb the heat from the house and put it into the refrigerant. Everything is just going to stand by there. A key phrase I want you to be aware of, if you don't know, please write it down. It's called the latent heat of vaporization. We actually talked about it, or I talked about it already. That's the latent heat, is the process of absorbing or discharging significant amounts of heat when I'm changing state. So going back to the BTUs, we talked before about if I add heat to something, it changes from a liquid to a gas. If I discharge heat or remove heat from something, it changes from a gas to a liquid. All right. So the first one, going from a liquid to a gas, that's latent heat of vaporization. So we say it takes about 1,000 BTUs to take that 1 pound of water and completely convert it over to a gas. All right. The other term that's not written up here I want you to know is latent heat of condensation. All right. So latent heat of vaporization is the amount of BTU transfers when I go from a liquid to a gas. Latent heat of condensation is the amount of heat transfer going from a gas to a liquid. All right. It's a tremendous amount of heat that we can absorb or discharge, but I do need you to know when we're absorbing and when we're discharging. So for me, it was always easiest to remember that pot of water on the stove. All right. If I got a fire underneath that stove, fire underneath the water, that water is absorbing heat. All right. As I'm absorbing heat, I'm changing from a liquid to a gas. And then vice versa. If I'm removing the heat, I'm going from a gas to a liquid. Latent heat of vaporization and latent heat of condensation. All right. So the evaporator coil, and we really give two names in air conditioning. We have a condensing coil and an evaporator coil. And if you think about what I just talked about, when we're evaporating, we're changing from a liquid to a gas. And when we're condensating, we're changing from a gas to a liquid. So refrigerant enters at about 20 degrees Fahrenheit. I think that was the first number I threw out there. We're going to assume that the house is somewhere around 75 degrees. And this is a simple test we can do as well. All right. It's going to change from a liquid to a gas. And as it changes, it's going to absorb the heat in the air that is blowing over the coils where it comes through it. So it comes in as a liquid at 20 degrees, absorbs heat from the house, and then the refrigerant is going to end up leaving as a gas roughly about 50 degrees. Now, when we go back and showing the lines again, we didn't really talk about the line set, but if you look at your air conditioning system, you're going to see two tubes out there. We call that the line set. One is going to be skinny and one is going to be fat, or bigger for a lesser word. The bigger line is also known as our gas line or our suction line or our low pressure line. That one's going to be cold to the touch. So, we're saying it's going to be around 50 degrees when we touch it. So if our hand is on it and we feel it, it's actually going to be pretty cool. Where it's a liquid coming in here is going to be after the restricting device. So that's going to lower the temperature down to 20 degrees. That's not going to be an area that we can actually touch. All right, so that's going to be inside the plenum or the air conditioning coil. Typically, it's going to be the capillary tubes, but we'll get to that in a little bit. All right. So let's go back here one more time. I want to pop those words back up there again and make sure we got everything on here covered. So warm house air boils the cold liquid. We chatted on that. Large amount of heat is absorbed. That's a test question. I need you to be aware of that. The heat that's being absorbed is called latent heat, and we're going to refer to this process as latent heat of vaporization. When we're discharging the heat, as we're changing state, that's a latent heat of condensation. And again, it does make for a very efficient heat transfer. So we have our indoor coil. We were just talking about that. We left the indoor coil as a gas, and it's 50 degrees. We said heat travels from hot to cold. So we need, if it's 100 degrees outside and my refrigerant is 50 degrees, well, the outside air is still going to the outside air is still going to be putting heat into the refrigerant. So I need to do something with that gas refrigerant to go ahead and increase the temperature of that. We mentioned earlier in our science stuff that when we increase the pressure, we're also increasing the temperature as we come to it. So this is just an old piston-shaped pump on here. Right now we use squirrel compressors to go ahead and put the system in there. But if it comes in as a gas, and the only thing that can go through these air compressors is a gas, and we're going to hit that with the temperatures that we check air conditioning in a little bit. So we can only send gas through the air compressor. It comes in at 50 degrees, but then once I pressurize the system, it's going to leave at about 150 degrees. All right, so just by pressurizing that gas, we increase the temperature by 100 degrees. Now it's warmer than what it is outside, and this air compressor is located in the outside compressor cabinet or condensing cabinet. It has a couple different names, but it's really the same thing. So the air compressor is in the outside metal cabinet. All right? And as it leaves there, it's 150 degrees. When it's 150 degrees, it's warmer than the outside air. So as we run it through all the coils and the same fins that are outside, we're going to actually start discharging heat to the outdoors. So as we discharge the heat, all right, come in at 150. Here we're saying it's 85. Outside air is going to probably go up about 15 degrees. And I did leave that off indoors. I want you to remember that air conditioning systems typically have a 15 to 20 degree temperature drop. And that's a real simple, easy test that we could do to see if these things are basically doing what they're supposed to be doing. We turn the air conditioning on. If it's 70 degrees in the house, we should be expecting it to be 50 to 55 degrees on the other side of the air conditioning coil in the plenum. Anything that's higher than that or lower than that could be an issue. High pressure liquid, because we raised the boiling point, and it leaves there at 100 degrees. So the skinny line is going to be warm to the touch, and then the suction line, before it goes into the cabinet, remember that 150 degrees is directly after the compressor. Before the compressor, it's 50 degrees. So what I'm going to be able to feel is the suction line on the outside is 50 degrees, and the liquid line on the outside was typically 100 degrees. All right. Forces hot, high-pressure refrigerant to the top of the coil located outside. The refrigerant travels through the coil. Same air transfer is happening, but in this case, we're discharging heat. As I'm discharging, I'm condensing my refrigerant, changing from a gas to a liquid. And again, as I change from a gas to a liquid, I discharge or I release a tremendous amount of heat that I had inside the refrigerant. All right. This is called latent heat of condensation when this happens. And we're just talking about the heat transfer without the temperature change. That is latent heat. So we started our indoor coil again. We absorbed heat. We're a gas. We send the gas to the compressor. We compress it. Now we make it a high temperature, high pressure gas. We blow outside air over it. We get rid of that heat. On there, it changes back to a liquid. It's still high pressure, but now I need to lower that pressure, because when I lower that pressure, then I'm going to go ahead and lower the temperature as well, so I could bring a nice cold liquid into my indoor air. All right. So the capillary tubes, and I'll show a picture of that in a little bit. The capillary tubes are going to be our typical bottleneck, our typical restricting device or metering device. All right. There are other ones out there. There are mechanical devices, and they call TXVs, or thermal expansion valves, and I'll show you what those look like and how they work in a little bit. But for now, I want to focus on the science behind the air conditioning. So what we're doing is we're holding that pressure back, and as we hold that pressure back, we're going to have that 100-degree temperature, and then as we let a little bit of the refrigerant out, so we lower the pressure of it, that significantly drops the temperature as well. And as we drop that temperature, we're going to drop, that's what we're going to be sending into the air conditioning unit. So now we have a 20-degree liquid, and we're going to bring that liquid to the inside. What we're looking at here is a schematic of a typical A coil. So basically, you'll see how I have two slabs leaning up next to each other. And then there's those little bit of coils that keep going round and round. That skinny tube is basically what's holding our pressure back and only letting a little bit of refrigerant come through at a time. And these systems are all engineered to work together. So the outside cabinet and the size of the compressor and the size of the coils have to match the indoor refrigerant coils as well. They can't be like a 4-ton unit outside and a 2-ton unit inside. They must match. Otherwise, they're not going to work properly. So if we ever get inside, and sometimes you'll see a panel on the indoor coils, so you could pull that panel off. Sometimes you can see it when you remove the humidifier, and you can look for these coils. Typically, we don't find too much going on with them. But if they're leaking, and you'll see that with signs of oil, but we wouldn't get our temperature changes anyway, or dented or damaged in any way, we should photograph them and document that as well. Here's an actual A coil that comes in there. So you can see how the skinny line, we call that the refrigerant line, and then that goes into those capillary tubes again. So the spinning of the capillary tubes that's on there, that's what's going to hold everything back. And you could see the fins. I like this picture a lot because we can actually see the coils and how they're going back and forth on there. We can see the fins, how they tighten and keep the air coming through it as well. And then when it leaves through the thicker line up there. That's called the suction line. So it comes in as a liquid and leaves it a gas as we absorb all the heat that's inside the house and put it into the refrigerant. So now we're under low pressure. We're a liquid. And this much right here with this drawing, I am expecting you to be able to write this down or draw this down. I want you to know there's 4 main components of an air conditioning system. All right. We're going to have our indoor coils and our outdoor coils. We're going to have a compressor, so something to increase the pressure, and then something, whether it's the capillary tubes or TXV, for a generic term, we're going to call it an expansion device, all right? So we're going to have something that's going to lower the pressure, or a metering device. I like that as more of a generic term as well. You're expected to know, when is it the high pressure side, when is it the low pressure side. So as we're looking at the drawing and we start at the top, anything after the compressor all the way up to where it says the expansion device, in between, on the right side of that, that's all under high pressure. Everything on the left side of that is all under low pressure. And then if I took another imaginary line and I put it across the coils, you're expected to know when it's a gas and when it's a liquid. So from the indoor coil, as it leaves the indoor coil, goes through the compressor and enters the outdoor coil, that's all a gas. And then from the outdoor coil, as it leaves that coil, including the expansion device or the metering device, until it gets into the indoor coil, that's where it's all going to be a liquid. The only places that we're supposed to be changing state is going to be in those coils. All right. So I'm expecting you to know when it's high pressure gas, when it's high temperature gas, when it's high pressure liquid, when it's medium temperature high pressure liquid, and then after the expansion valve, we're going to be low temperature, low pressure liquid. As we go through the coil and we change to a gas, we're going to be medium temperature, low pressure, and as a gas. Hit our compressor again, high temperature, high pressure, still a gas, change state in the outdoor coil back to a liquid.